On January 20th, 2016, firefighters in Fresno, California, pulled the lifeless body of 51-year-old John Lang from his burning home. The local police, almost before the embers had cooled, stood before the public and declared the tragedy a textbook suicide. But that is a lie. John Lang did not kill himself. He was meticulously assassinated by the very people sworn to protect his city. The proof isn't just a theory, it is etched into the digital footprint he left behind. Days before his death, Lang publicly named the officers stalking him, caught their surveillance operations on his own security cameras, and explicitly warned the internet that the police were going to murder him. Today, we are going to tear apart the fabricated official timeline, examine the physically impossible autopsy results, and expose the terrifying reality of a police department that acted as judge, jury, and executioner. We are taught from a very young age that if you are in danger, you call the police. But what do you do when the police are the ones hunting you? Who do you call when the flashing red and blue lights in your rearview mirror don't represent safety, but a death sentence? To understand the sheer scale of the systemic rot in this case, you have to understand who John Lang was. He wasn't a cartel boss. He wasn't a violent criminal. He was a local activist, a businessman, and a man who simply paid attention. In the early 2010s, the Fresno Police Department was operating under the command of Police Chief Jerry Dyer, a man whose tenure was marred by continuous allegations of excessive force, corruption, and a distinct lack of transparency. John Lang noticed, and more importantly, John Lang started writing about it. Lang operated a local community blog where he began heavily criticizing the Fresno Police Department's practices, specifically their predatory use of automated license plate readers. He discovered and published evidence that the police were allegedly using these readers to target lower-income neighborhoods, generating massive amounts of revenue through petty citations and vehicle impounds. He was shining a spotlight on a multi-million-dollar revenue stream that relied on exploiting the city's most vulnerable citizens. He was bad for business, and the department noticed him back. This is where the story shifts from a local political dispute into a psychological thriller. In the months leading up to his death, Lang's life became a living hell. It didn't start with violence. It started with bureaucratic terrorism. Lang reported being relentlessly pulled over for phantom traffic violations. He received an absurd number of citations for minor, often fabricated infractions regarding his property. It was a clear, coordinated campaign of intimidation, a warning shot. Stop looking into our pockets, or we will ruin your life. But Lang didn't back down. He leaned in. He realized that the harassment was escalating, so he fortified his home. He installed a state-of-the-art, multi-camera surveillance system around his property. He began documenting everything, and what his cameras captured was chilling. Lang began posting footage to YouTube and his blog showing unmarked vans parking across the street from his home for hours on end. He captured video of individuals, who he identified as plainclothes Fresno police officers, sneaking around the perimeter of his property in the dead of night. In one terrifying instance, he filmed what appeared to be a police vehicle using a thermal imaging scanner directed at his house, a tactic typically reserved for high-level narcotics raids, not local bloggers. Let that sink in. A taxpayer, sitting in his own living home, being hunted with military-grade surveillance equipment simply because he asked where the city's money was going. As January 2016 approached, Lang's posts grew increasingly desperate. He wasn't paranoid. He was hyper-aware of a very real tightening noose. He reached out to local journalists. They ignored him. He reached out to internal affairs. He was met with silence. He realized, with horrifying clarity, that he was entirely alone. The system was never going to save him, because the system was the predator. On January 14th, 6 days before he was found dead, John Lang posted a message on Facebook that should haunt the conscience of every citizen in this country. He wrote, "If anything happens to me in the next day or two, it will be the result of Fresno PD." He named specific officers. He detailed their methods. He essentially wrote his own murder investigation report because he knew the detectives assigned to his eventual corpse would be the very men who put him in the ground. 3 days later, on January 17th, he reached out to a local reporter, Corinne Hoggard, tweeting, "Corinne, you want a good story? Check out the Fresno PD corruption. I've been targeted, set up, and they want me dead." The reporter did not respond. 3 days later, John Lang's house was engulfed in flames. When firefighters extinguished the blaze, they found Lang unresponsive in the kitchen. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The Fresno Police Department immediately took jurisdiction of the scene. Within hours, before the smoke had even cleared, before a thorough forensic analysis could be completed, the department released a statement heavily implying that John Lang, the man who had just spent months fighting for his life, had suddenly decided to end it. And this brings us to the outrage. This is where the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the system reveals itself. The establishment expects you to believe their narrative because they wear a badge. But the physical evidence of John Lang's death is an insult to basic human intelligence. Let's look at the autopsy. The Fresno County Coroner's Office, an entity whose budget and daily operations are intimately tied to the police department, released their findings. They ruled the cause of death as smoke inhalation and thermal burns. But they had to explain away the other injuries on Lang's body. John Lang had 3 distinct stab wounds to his chest and abdomen. The medical examiner, performing Olympic-level mental gymnastics to protect the police narrative, classified these stab wounds as superficial and labeled them hesitation marks. The official narrative they presented to the public was this: John Lang, in a fit of sudden, unexplained depression, decided to take a kitchen knife, stab himself in the torso 3 times, failed to hit a vital organ, then decided to set his own house on fire and simply stood in the kitchen inhaling smoke until he died. This is not just improbable. It is a forensic fairy tale designed to cover up a homicide. Consider the reality of the human survival instinct. To stab oneself in the torso requires immense, overriding force. To do it 3 times, and then to calmly ignite a fire and await asphyxiation, defies every known psychological profile of suicide. Furthermore, independent experts who have reviewed the publicly available autopsy data have pointed out that the angles and depths of the wounds are entirely consistent with an attacker thrusting a blade, and the so-called hesitation marks are infinitely more likely to be defensive wounds sustained while fighting off a killer. But the coroner, working hand in hand with the investigators they share a payroll with, willfully ignored the context. They ignored the fact that the victim had publicly predicted his own murder. They ignored the fact that the victim had explicitly named his murderers. They looked at a man stabbed in his own burning home and called it an accident of his own making. But the systemic failure doesn't end in the morgue. It extends to the very crime scene itself. Remember the extensive state-of-the-art security system John Lang installed? The cameras that had been diligently recording the police stalking him for months? When the fire department and police cleared the scene, the footage from the day of the murder was gone. The Fresno Police Department claimed that the fire had conveniently damaged the recording equipment. They claimed that the cameras happened to be malfunctioning on the exact afternoon John Lang died. In a house equipped with over a dozen cameras recording directly to a DVR, the police expect us to believe in a localized, catastrophic technological failure that occurred simultaneously with a spontaneous knife-wielding suicide. Even worse, neighbors reported seeing a suspicious vehicle speeding away from the Lang residence moments before the fire broke out. Did the police canvass the neighborhood for dash cam or Ring doorbell footage to identify this vehicle? No, because to investigate a fleeing vehicle would be to acknowledge a suspect, and the police had already decided the suspect was lying dead in the kitchen. Chief Jerry Dyer eventually held a press conference. Standing before the media, he dismissed the internet's outrage as conspiracy theories. He painted John Lang not as a whistleblower, but as a deeply disturbed, paranoid man who tragically took his own life. It is the oldest trick in the authoritarian playbook. Pathologize the victim. If you can convince the public that the man screaming about the wolves is just crazy, you don't have to explain the bite marks on his body. The investigation into John Lang's death was closed. No federal agency stepped in to audit the Fresno Police Department. No independent prosecutor was assigned to review the conflict of interest in a police department investigating its own loudest critic's highly suspicious death. The system protected itself, just as it was designed to do. John Lang's story is a terrifying indictment of American law enforcement accountability. It proves that a badge does not just grant you the power to enforce the law. In certain jurisdictions, it grants you the power to rewrite reality. It allows you to walk into a crime scene, look at a murdered whistleblower, erase the hard drives, lie to the press, and walk away with your pension intact. John Lang tried to warn us about the monster hiding behind the veil of authority. He documented its tracks. He pointed directly at its face, and for his bravery, the monster burned his house down and called him crazy. The tragic reality is that John Lang died knowing exactly what was going to happen to him. And he died knowing that the men who did it would likely never see the inside of a courtroom. His blood is not just on the hands of the individuals who entered his home that day. It is on the hands of the coroner who lied for them, the chief who covered for them, and a justice system that turns a blind eye whenever the killer is wearing a uniform. If you thought the corruption in Fresno was enough to make your blood boil, wait until you hear how a billionaire heir managed to buy his way out of a brutal double homicide, silencing witnesses and manipulating judges to ensure the law only applied to the poor. Click the video on your screen to see the case they spent millions trying to bury forever.